As you can see, this webinar will be recorded, will be posted later. And I also just want to point out, I'm not yet a doctor, but I'm close, almost a doctor. Welcome and thank you for taking time this afternoon to join us. We're joining from all over the country and maybe other parts of the world as well. And while we meet here on this virtual platform, we'd like to take a moment to recognize the importance of the land on which we're located. I'm currently zooming in from the city of Vaughan today, which is situated on the traditional territory and Treaty 13 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, as well as the traditional lands of the Huron-Wendat and Haudenosaunee. And we're grateful for the opportunity to work on the lands that we are on, and we hope that our work today and outside of this webinar honors and upholds our traditional landholders. If you are new to the CASE and CSO webinars, thank you for coming. We are going to engage in the conversation the same way that we normally do. So you'll notice that we have all the participants not without their videos, but you have a chat box that you can add questions to. So we have our Q&A function there, and you can upvote questions, which makes it easier for us during the discussion part of this webinar to grab the most important questions to our participants. You also have Zoom generated closed captioning available, which you can turn on yourself on your computer. And with that, we'll move into today's presentations. Our first presentation is from Dr. Patricia Douglas, who's the inaugural chair in Student Success and Wellness and Associate Professor of Disability Studies at Queen's University. And the presentation she will be giving us today is Restoring Autism, a Digital Storytelling and Disability Justice Approach. Take it away, Dr. Douglas. You're muted still, so just unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here. Too many things on the screen. Bear with me just for a minute while I share my screen here. Can you see that? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks. So welcome and hello. My name is Patty Douglas. I'm delighted to be here to share a little bit about the project I founded and currently lead called Restoring Autism in Education, including our disability justice approach. I come to this work with multiple deep and conflicting social identities. Sometimes I am a white settler and tenured research, doing work in partnership with Indigenous organizations, decolonizing stories of autism. I am a former special education teacher and a single mom of 2 neurodivergent sons, one of whom attracted the label of autism, and I identify as neurodivergent and invisibly disabled. I'm committed to holding all of these various threads together and navigating the tensions that arise, including the ongoing unlearning and relearning, and that phrasing comes from Marie Baptiste, that they evoke. To provide a little bit of a description of myself to start, I'm a middle-aged, cisgender white woman with shoulder-length blonde hair and black-rimmed glasses. I also identify as sort of queerly queer, and today I'm wearing a burgundy dress. So I invite you to take part in whatever way is most comfortable for you, sort of participate using the way that was explained. If you want to ask questions out loud, I love that during discussion, if that's possible. And the slides I'll just describe that I share today are on solid color backgrounds, blue, green, orange, and turquoise. And I'm using white text, and my project logo is on there, a rainbow colored swoosh, like a wave or flames dancing with the words restoring underneath. And I will read any text that's included on the slides out loud and provide brief image descriptions as I go. So usually I invite people to move around, doodle, come on camera, share your pronouns as you like, and also anything else that will make you comfortable as you enter into this space today. I'm also coming to you from Takaranto, which is part of where I move in the world. I'm also in Kingston and just moved to Queens from Brandon, Manitoba. So acknowledging and grateful for the learning and living I do on these lands. So just a quick overview of my talk. I'll introduce the Restoring Project a little bit. I'll talk about and share some interview findings and insights from films we've made into decolonizing stories of autism workshops and screen one short film. And along the way, I consider how our workshops held space in autism research to challenge Western deficit perspectives. So the Restoring Autism Project is a participatory arts and community engaged multimedia story making and interview project in Turtle Island, Canada, Aotearoa, New Zealand, and England. In our storytelling workshops, we bring together autistic and non-autistic artists, educators, researchers, family, kin, and communities online and in person to make the story they most need to tell at the time about their experiences of school. These stories often take the form of short first-person videos, but our co-researcher collective, a group of autistic artists, activists, and graduate students who meet monthly online, initiate research and advise the project, has also made and exhibited zines, which are do-it-yourself magazines, and is currently planning a community collage research initiative called the Report Card Project. At last count, Restoring has collaboratively produced and globally shared products and insights from over 85 short films, 2 short documentaries, 16 zines, and over 150 interviews. On the project, we understand autism and indeed all body-mind difference as a fundamental part of living and learning together well on planet Earth. And on the screen is a screenshot from Bernie Wasney's video, who made a video and advised and helped facilitate our workshop in Aotearoa called A Mother's Hopes and Dreams. And it pictures a line of children holding hands above their heads. The caption reads, "The award for helping in Kapahaka practice goes to Michael." Our work on the project is informed by disability justice, an intellectual, arts, and political movement led by Indigenous, Black, other people of color, queer, and disabled folks who center social justice principles, including intersectionality, economic justice, care, collective access, and more. It means, as disability justice activist and author Leah Lakshmi Pyepsna Samarasinha puts it, quote, that we are not left behind. We are beloved, kindred, needed, end quote. On the Restoring Project, we frame our research workshops using disability justice principles. This sets the stage for research to unsettle the mythical normal student, white, middle class, male, normatively abled, cisgender, and so on, that haunts autism research and Western education. The mythical normal student has its moorings in deficit legacies, including individualism, capitalism, Western science, and the hierarchicalization of race and ability, and Western European Enlightenment notions of human progress tied to developmentalism, the idea that all humans, and indeed all societies, should develop according to so-called universal norms and stages. This legacy often casts autism as a developmental disorder, a tragedy, less than human, and a problem in need of a solution, to use Tanya Tchaikovsky's words, often through intensive normalizing therapies. Framing our research using disability justice then also sets the stage to revalue, affirm, and center difference in research and in schools. Given our commitment to disability justice, when COVID-19 hit, and with the support of colleagues like Carla Rice, founder of the Revision Center for Art and Social Justice at the University of Guelph, we worked to flip our research workshops online and started to think about how we might use the moment to decenter dominant Western deficit perspectives in autism research a little more. As part of our preparation, we read Indigenous and non-Indigenous scholars like Nicole Anise Nash and Leanne Betta Samosake Simpson, whose work focused on decolonizing difference as well as interconnections between ableist and colonialist systems. I reached out to Jill Bevan-Brown, a prominent but retired Maori scholar, as I found out, in education, and through her met Maori community educator Dorothy Tari-Smith, who's featured on the slide here, founder of Taonga Takiwatona Trust in Gisborne, Aotearoa. As we talked together, a synergy and desire emerged to co-design a Decolonizing Stories of Autism workshop, which we held in 2021. This co-design unfolded through many drafts and revisions of the workshop process together. Dorothy and other Maori storymakers and advisors who took part in the workshop held us accountable to our new relationships by tasking us with sharing their stories widely. The Manitoba Indigenous Stories of Autism workshop in 2022 took shape similarly. We partnered with Leah LaPlante of the Manitoba Métis Federation Southwest and the Brandon Friendship Center. Leah asked me and the Friendship Center to collaborate after she saw one of the films made in one of our workshops. The workshop design was guided by elders and knowledge keepers. And on the screen is an image of a computer screen with the video editing software open, and photograph of collaborator and now friend, Dorothy Tari-Smith. And I've actually now been where Dorothy is recording that video, which is the most beautiful place. I'm acutely aware of my white privilege in research and have come to reflect on my place in decolonizing research as a critical ally, in part in relation to Michi-Sangig, Nishnabeg, artist, scholar, and musician Leanne Betasamosake Simpson. Simpson writes about one of her academic mentors, a quote, holder of space, who created the space to put Nishnabeg intelligence at the center and use its energy to drive the project, end quote. As I co-planned the workshops with my Indigenous colleagues in Aotearoa and Manitoba, and my settler colleagues as well, we reflected together on ways we might become holders of space to move beyond, as Tuck and Yang assert, decolonization as a metaphor. To give an example, instead of taking space and time to frame the workshop through my own arguably settler colonialist academic terms, I invited, centered, and paid Indigenous elders and facilitators to reset the terms of the research space. And so I'd like to share with you now a short video made from Manitoba, the Manitoba Indigenous Approaches to Autism workshop. Some of the content of the film, such as bullying and misdiagnosis, may be difficult to behold. I invite you to take care of yourself in whatever way is most comfortable, and to tune in or tune out as you like. The intent of viewing and responding to films is not mastery or critique, but rather we invite viewers to consider how they both might move with and are moved by the stories. And on the screen are two questions that help guide how we hope you might enter the stories. So the first is, what is the film doing? And the second is, what is the storyteller asking us to see, hear, feel, or sense that might be new? And after I screen this brief film, I'll give you a minute to kind of gather your thoughts and feelings before I go on. So I'll just let us be in silence after, and then I'll invite you to kind of share during the discussion and question period. If so, just to bring you back, ableism and colonialism have historically colluded to devalue, contain, and segregate difference along race and ability lines, as Walter's story so powerfully depicts. O.G. Cree scholar and community educator Nicole Anise-Nash argues that, quote, the label of disability is a construct and exists as a mechanism of colonialism which does not align with Indigenous perspectives of difference, end quote. These complex intertwinings of Western ableist and colonialist discourses generate ongoing interference in autistic and Indigenous ways of being, community, and culture. For example, in settler colonial contexts like Canada and New Zealand, child welfare systems systematically apprehend Indigenous disabled children at higher rates. School exclusions and incarceration rates for Indigenous disabled people far exceed those of other settlers, and disability labels often signal mental and physical deficiency and stream Indigenous disabled children into segregated, inferior, or dead-end education programs. Our findings from interviews with autistic Indigenous people, family and kin, and elders from the workshops that we did in Manitoba and Aotearoa reflect many of Walter's experiences and Inez Nash's arguments. One Manitoba participant summed it up when she said, quote, "These approaches don't work for our people," end quote. Participants spoke with us about stigma and misunderstanding at school by teachers and peers, the compounding factors of ableism and racism in misdiagnosis, for example, or behavior labels, and ubiquitous school violence. Families talked about barriers to getting an autism diagnosis, lack of respite, lack of cultural safety in autism services, and surveillance by child and family services, including the fear of apprehension of children by the state, and having to make your house immaculate or avoiding services because of this reality. At the same time, participants articulated Indigenous understandings of disability and autism outside deficit legacies. They told us there is often no word for deficit or disorder in Indigenous languages. Instead, languages emerging, for example, in Maori, and the word takiwatanga, meaning they're in their own space and time, and michif, pitoshi iti yetium, one who thinks differently, that affirm diversity as fundamental to life. Family, kukums, and elders spoke about children as gifts and advocated for smudging, beadwork, and kukums in the schools, being on the land, and gentle, affirming approaches based on relationships with each unique child. Autistic participants emphasize the basics, treat us like we are human, and take the time to understand. Our disability justice informed workshops ask us to reconsider the rub between Western deficit legacies of individualization, hierarchicalization of difference, and developmentalism, and their expression in education approaches that value autonomy over and above interdependence, culture, and relationships. We are currently in the process of preparing publications incorporating videos and interview findings from these workshops that highlight how this approach invites into research relationality, uniqueness, humanity, and context, unsettles hierarchies of race and ability, and holds space to tangibly affirm and center difference. Thank you. I'll just stop sharing now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Douglas, for that presentation. That was amazing. And the videos, it was just amazing. Thank you so much. And Jennie, we'll turn it over to you now. I'll welcome Jennie Burton, who's a PhD candidate at the University of Alberta, for the presentation, Putting Education Back Together, a critical discourse analysis approach to finding spaces for autistic children in Alberta schools.
Thank you so much. I'm just gonna share my screen here. Okay. All right. And can everybody see that? Perfect. Okay, thank you so much. So, hello everyone. I'm very happy to be here. I'm a little nervous. This is my first webinar, so I'm hoping to just speak slowly and sort of stay calm. So my name is Jennie Burton. I work with my supervisor, Dr. Haley Morrison, and we are both from the University of Alberta, and I am here in Edmonton. In this presentation, I'm going to share with you how I position myself within this work, some of my past research and experiences, and my current graduate work. So I believe our perceptions are shaped by our histories. And so my interest in neurodiversity developed during my undergraduate degree in psychology. And there I was really focused on cognition and how we perceived and interpreted information around us and constructed it into our knowledge. And during that time, I elected to take a course in educational inclusion where I met Dr. Tim Norman, who is a big advocate for educational inclusion here in Alberta. And I was very inspired with his work, and I decided to follow him to the elementary education department where I got my degree in education. And there I really focused on this social constructivism perspective. And we were really challenging these traditional ways of teaching and learning and really grappling with this idea of inclusion. Once I finished that, I went and I taught in schools for 15 years, kindergarten to grade 6. And then I sort of was becoming dissatisfied with some of the models that we were using in terms of how neurodivergent students were engaging and interested in some of the learning opportunities. So I went back to school to get my master's in educational leadership. And then I followed up with my doctoral. And so that's where I am now. With a broad overview of being interested in educational inclusion and neurodiversity. So I've come to grapple a little bit with educational inclusion as a whole, mostly because the term has become quite a buzz term in a lot of ways. And so we've attached words like diversity and equity, and now there's this movement of belonging. So really, I feel like I work through the process of trying to understand how it fits in various models. So the medical model that we see that's prevalent in a lot of our schools, I sort of associate with my psychology degree. And then I was exploring that social model during my elementary education degree, where we were looking at accommodations and modifications. And then during my graduate work, I kind of became more situated in this neurodiversity model. And as I became more invested in this, I learned that this medical model and the social model become encompassed into this larger model. So for me, neurodiversity is a term that I have used to not replace, but to add in from autism. A lot of my experiences are working with autistic children, and a lot of my research work has been involves that literature. But as I learned more and more about it, I became uncomfortable with just including children with autistic labels. We see a lot of different neurodiverse ways of thinking. So I've come to this understanding that brains are all uniquely wired, the way that we process information, the way we construct our realities. So I've switched from autism to include more communities in this neurodiversity term. So what am I perceiving as some of the problems based on my experiences working in schools? And I've done some interviews with teachers during my master's degree. And I found that teachers are struggling to understand. And I also did a thematic discourse analysis on community blogs and vlogs. There's been this growing literature of adults reflecting on their school experiences, as we saw in the first presentation. And so I moved over to see what some of these communities were saying. And what ended up resulting from that was what is described by Milton as this double empathy problem, where we have this miscommunication between both sides. And so using this data cache of blogs and vlogs, I became interested in how this miscommunication is enacted in our learning and teaching environments. So in my experiences and what I teach in my pre-service courses is the model of learning that is relational in respect to that we're in a school community that is housed within a larger educational institution, and that we produce and we present new information to students, and students assimilate this information. So they add it to things they already know, or they accommodate this information and they construct knowledge which is the point of teaching and learning. That's our end goal. But what I think is problematic is that there's differences in the ways that we perceive, and we all have different cognitive resources available to us. And this is very prevalent with young learners in particular, who have who are just like formulating themselves, and they're developing and they're growing and they're learning, and they're underdeveloped. And then we see this whether or not we can interest and motivate our students. So we have a common curriculum. So we're always choosing as teachers directed what we're going to try and engage students with. And these come with these emotional attachments. And of course, then we also have the engagement and how students are able to apply their attention and engage in this learning process. So this model for me really operationalizes how we see teaching and learning in our school systems. And it started to make me wonder whether or not this model was appropriate and applicable to some of our learners. One of the major problems I see with this model is that it's based on the interpretation of behaviors. And what ends up happening is that teachers are responsible and accountable for keeping order in classrooms. So you have this global perspective where you need to look after the community, but then you have this individual perspective where we're looking after the individual needs of students. And sometimes those can be in tension because the parameters around behavior and what behaviors imply learning and what are expected and what should be done are very much in this sense making of our values, our systems. And so there's not really one way to do this or to interpret it. So I'm just going to give you an example here. Last year, during my doctoral work, I took a year off and I decided to do some subbing in what we call interactions rooms. These are classrooms that are built specifically for autistic children. And this was one of the behavior plans systems that they had in place, where they have operationalized behaviors that are expected. They've ranked them in severity, and they've also quantified discipline for not meeting these expectations. And based on this, I realized that this was very different from what I was experiencing in my classrooms and different from what I saw other teachers doing. So I came to wonder, how is the classroom community itself, the choices made by the teachers, the external stimulus, how is that impacting how students are getting opportunities? And how is it impacting their motivation and engagement to learn new information? And this really comes from two lenses. The sensory stimuli, where just the physical things in the classroom. And then, of course, the social stimuli, where we have communication, we have people in proximity to each other, we have peers interacting, and we also have the pressures to achieve, to learn, the purpose. So I selected this picture here, this very colorful one, because there was this very fashionable trend a couple of years ago to make these engaging classrooms that were bright and would interest kids. And really what ended up happening is that some of this became very overstimulating for students. And there was a lot to look at. It was very hard to focus with all of the chaotic type situations in the classroom. So at its very basic, having a classroom environment that oversensitizes and activates and creates all of this neurological sort of chaos happening, or having situations where we don't have any interest and we're pretty much just ignoring new information. As teachers, we're trying to sort of find that balance in the middle where we're excited enough to engage, but we're not so excited that it overwhelms us and we can't get our attention to focus on the learning process. So why is this really important? With the autism movements and the advocacy for identity and acceptance and belonging, it's really important to consider how we fit as individuals into the context. So students, how they perceive themselves fitting as successful members of the classroom community will impact how they approach and avoid new opportunities. And within this, they are constructing who they are in relation to the rest of the community. And if students feel they can't engage authentically, if their behaviors are not matching, then they're vulnerable to being excluded from the community, even though physically they're within the community. And this is really where we start to talk about inclusion, this sense of being able to see, feel, and act the way that is authentic to us, while also engaging in the learning process. So my research question has come to explore, to wonder about the relationship between the sensory experiences as a big construct of neurodiverse learners, the educational decision-making of teachers, and the overarching inclusion policies that are in place in Alberta. For my data collection method, I am planning on using online qualitative vignettes. So the purpose of this is to provide two versions of a vignette that produce a hypothetical scenario with detailed characters, a set context, and a common dilemma. For learner participants, this is going to be based in the second person because I want to place the participants as active characters in the story to understand their experiences and the applications of how these decisions are being made and experienced for the students. And for educators, the vignette is going to be framed in a third person where they are set outside of the story. And I feel like this is important because I'm not looking to explore the truth value of experiences or the experiences at all. This provides opportunities for educators to share what they believe should happen or what they believe does happen, rather than just trying to find out what they would do. And it also provides some opportunities to respond and be a part of this survey without actually having any of these experiences. After the vignette, so the vignette will be presented on an online format. Participants will be invited to access that through a QR code. I'm hoping to present posters for recruitment and to do social media recruitment. And once they read or listen to the vignette, I'm going to have it as a visual and an auditory display. It'll be followed by 5 open-ended question prompts. And so for the learners, it'll be about how they were experienced and their perceptions. And for the educators, it'll be more about how things were interpreted and the processes and the assumptions that underlie these dilemmas. My methodology is going to take a critical approach to really understand how inclusion policy is enacted within the classroom communities. So I'm interested in understanding how these behavioral ideologies are enacted, so interpreted and translated into classroom experiences, and to really understand how these systems set the parameters for how we understand teaching and learning, to ask the question as to whether this model is the most appropriate model. In a lot of ways, I find that we're trying to ask if students fit into our models. And I think it's more important to ask whether these models are fitting our students. Imposing policy and taking a critical approach, I think is very important because we do have this regulatory discourse of policy that requires our mandatory engagement. As teachers, we are accountable, as well as students are accountable and parents are accountable. And this has an impact on our instructional discourse because it's teacher directed and it holds the common skills and knowledge through our curriculums. It also has the same expected results. We are still trying to create democratic citizens. We want students to comply, and we're always in this perpetual goal of improving educational success. So the history of inclusive reform in Alberta that I explored already really came to a project from 2008 to 2012 called Setting the Direction for Special Education in Alberta. It was very inspirational. It was very, challenging some of the traditional models. And then after 2012, we kind of see this kind of fall by the wayside, and mostly this was the result of a political change-up. On the other side of the inclusion debate is always the special education policy, because this still exists despite our aspirations to create a one system. So the history of special education in Alberta started sort of in the 2000s, went to 2006 with the development of these standards, and then was picked up again in 2019. So for the critical discourse analysis portion of my research, I've selected to model it after Chiliarchy and Fairclough, who advise, rather than looking at one policy, is to compare policies over time. So for the inclusive discourse, I have selected to look at the policies involving the inclusive schools from the project in 2012 and the most recent 22 ministerial order on student learning. And for the disability discourse, I selected the 2006 Essential Components series. And then now 2019, they have kind of grouped all of these things together into one document. My analysis is a critical discourse analysis. I'm collecting text data. I'm looking at policy data. So a discourse analysis seems like a very logical way to look at this. My goal is to be emergent and comparative. So my plan is to do a deductive thematic analysis on the 3 separate data sets. So on the policy, on the learner's discourse, and then on the education discourse. A similar process for all of them to identify patterns and meanings, and to describe and interpret the meaning and importance of those patterns. Once I have those, I plan to impose them on each other to see where I can find intersections, tensions, and omissions. My plan for dissemination is my dissertation. So obviously I'm like a budding researcher. So still kind of working out some of these kinks and some of these ideas. So I obviously presenting here today, looking to see some insight. And if anybody had any insight or advice for me going forward, I'd be very appreciative of that. My hope is that my dissertation will be framed in an appreciative and a positive stance. I am looking to bridge understanding, even though I'm taking a critical approach where I'm looking for discrepancies and I'm looking for tensions. The idea is not to highlight the tensions, but to find ways to mediate the tensions or bridge those tensions. The trustworthiness and reliability of this study, I'm looking to strengthen and bolster the qualitative reasonability of my results. So the privacy, anonymity, and accessibility of being online is very important. It takes away that face-to-face interaction, which can be very difficult for some, as well as takes the overarching policy pressures away so participants can answer in their own time, in their own language, in their own space. And in addition, I'm hoping to strengthen the trustworthiness by triangulating the multiple points of view, by imposing my data sets to make a case for plausibility and credibility. So that is my research in a nutshell, what I'm hoping to do, what I'm planning to do. Thank you so much for coming and listening to my presentation today. And I will pass it back to Christine, I think.
Yep, that's me. Thank you so much, Jennie, and thank you so much, Dr. Douglas, for your presentations. We are going to open it up to questions. Please feel free to use the Q&A function to enter questions that you have. And I see that we've already got someone asking if we could have access to the slides. I was able to check with one of our presenters, and I'll check with the other one, but I think we should be able to have access to at least some of them. afterwards. So I'll coordinate with how that might get to our participants. But in the meantime, yeah, please add your questions. And to both Jennie and Patty, I was wondering if either of you had questions for the other presenter that came up during the presentation. And if not, I can totally start while we're thinking. But something that came to mind for me that not being a disability scholar in any way is that there's been a lot more conversation in my life about neurodivergence since the popularization of the TV show Love on the Spectrum. And I was wondering if you could discuss, as the experts in the room, because I always feel a little bit torn when the discussion turns there about how I'm supposed to feel about this, but what are the opportunities and the risks about a venue like that, where as both of you have highlighted, the need for storytelling in your own words is very important, and the use of kind of thicker research modes and methodologies, like using vignettes and using qualitative data as opposed to collapsing individuals into numbers. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that kind of turn in popular culture right now.
I do, but Jennie, do you want to go first?
No, I think it would be nice.
No?
I'll bounce off you.
I both am really encouraged, but also want to put caution because neurodivergence and neurodiversity came out of autistic and other kind of disability activism, and I worry that it's losing it's at sort of at risk of losing its kind of critical weight or critical impact, because it's being taken up in all of these different discourses, academic and otherwise, in sometimes superficial ways that don't really commit to changing practice and to changing the terms of the space. I also, am learning as I'm working alongside different Indigenous communities is, that neurodiversity is not a new thing. So although it's claimed in the global north by white, pretty much predominantly white global or white disability and sort of other movements, it's actually part of diversity that's being recognized by Indigenous culture since time immemorial. So those are my two sort of cautions, but at the same time it's really encouraging. When I started doing this work years ago, there was no legibility for the work. There was sort of outside of autistic community, I would say, educators, there was no legibility in an education context. It was just beginning. So I think there's such a radical potential of, representational shift, at the same time that there are some dangers that we need to sort of guard against, bringing it back, like Jennie was saying, to sort of autistic community and neurodivergent community. They're the drivers. So on my project, I'm neurodivergent myself, but that co-researcher collective really drives my project. And if I'm doing something in community, the community drives the project, right? Which is the way that we can keep it, what's the word? I want to use the word radical, but I mean, that roots out those assumptions, that got us here in the first place. So that's my answer.
No, thank you. I think that's a really good point about terms being important in and of themselves and losing their criticality when they're taken out of context and used kind of by everyone and their uncle. Jennie, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I resonated with the superficial ways, and I was thinking about how a lot of the time in our educational arenas, especially with our young learners in elementary that these words we use to describe, labeling a student as autistic, and some of the assumptions that are coming alongside that with how teachers approach that year. So, even just hearing, okay, you're going to have an autistic student in your class next year, the ways that teachers are responding to that is sometimes in a way that can be very superficial. So, I've heard a lot of situations where, well, I'm going to need a visual schedule, I'm going to need this, I'm going to need this, and we start cherry picking all of these things that we believe are true about these students and what they're going to need. And then rather than taking the time to learn about these students, which I'm not criticizing in any way, there's 30 kids in the classroom and this is hard to do. But if we just select and then we impose these strategies on students, then we're kind of missing the point. We're using all of these commercialized and economized different strategies, but we're not sure if this is translating into useful, helpful, identity building, autonomy building, self-determination little people. So that's where I would say that there's a lot of debates over the terms to use. How do we refer? And it sort of always comes back to they're little people and we deal with them and we relate to them as they are. And there's really no, special words to identify and explain them. They just are. So that would be my answer, I guess.
Amazing. I'm going to move over to the Q&A. So we have a question here. I'm Akila, law student, Andaman Law College, Port Blair, and Andaman and Nicobar Islands, India. My question is, how do we stop bullying, which usually happens in school or college campuses against autistic people? As if we give them a comfort and understanding environment, we give them comfortable and understanding environment, it can bring a good impact on them. So what social measures can be taken to bring such awareness in society?
I have ideas. But Jennie, did you want to take this one first, or would you like me to start?
Okay, I can speak a little bit to it. What was the question addressing bullying specifically in university context?
It asks both school or college, so I would imagine K all the way up, to 16
Oh,
plus. Yeah.
okay, sure, yeah. I mean, this is touching on a very complex question. A lot of the time, we do tons of anti-bullying initiatives. I mean, that is a big moneymaker in terms of our resources, our initiatives. Money gets funneled there all the time. And a part of the problem with bullying is that sometimes it can be so overt and hidden, where you have a student who understands another student is sensitive to sounds, and then they will deliberately make those sounds to agitate them. And these forms of bullying are the ones that are the most problematic, the ones we see, somebody shoving another student, something like that. We see those, we attend to those, but it's these hidden ones that are really hard to identify and to combat against. So I think really it's this idea of students, teachers need to behave inclusively. Like, inclusion isn't something that happens. We need to change the way we address and the way we speak and the way that we treat others. But a critical component is to teach students how to be inclusive, how to help others belong. And it's when these students start to understand and start acting in this manner that the bullying will stop. So we're always fighting it from the top, but really we need to be fighting it from the bottom to educate the students and to have the students claiming that bullying will be unacceptable rather than the adults saying it's unacceptable. No easy task, but that would be my perspective on how maybe we can start looking at the bullying problem.
I agree. I think that continuing to work on multiple levels, right? So it's not a uniform kind of theory of change that everything kind of, you can only do it one way. So I used to want revolution when I was young. I thought that was the only way to change things. But now I see that, on multiple levels we need to work. So keep working on the sort of paradigm shift and the shift of how, who and how the terms of education is set. And lots of us are doing that, as well as sort of like Jennie's saying, like work at the ground level. So a couple things I'm doing, we're starting a neurodiversity alliance in the high schools in Limestone District School Board outside like one of the school boards in Kingston, where autistic and neurodivergent students are at the center, and they're taking sort of collective action that's initiated and led by them. So getting sort of administrators on side with that kind of action, as well as, story. For me, I do a lot with story, which is quite transformative. So centering different perspectives and building solidarity through different means. Like, so for me, it's storytelling. So, another thing we're going to do with that district and have done in other instances is sort of storytelling work, because I think we also have to shift minds and hearts and sort of what we do, like the doing of inclusion, like you're saying, Jennie, the practice, the social practice that we enter the spaces with. So I'm actually leaving shortly after this to go to Portage La Prairie and present with a couple of other collaborators a whole day to Manitoba administrators, special services administrators, and bringing story and bringing, sort of different kinds of story and engaging the leadership. And I do that with large groups of teachers and educational assistants and family and clinicians. And so like that real work on the ground, I think I agree, Jennie. I do also think we need to keep pushing the larger paradigm shift despite its perils of losing its, edge. I think we have to kind of keep pushing for a shift. Yeah.
Thank you both so much. And the next question is specifically for Jennie. In the question and answer chat, when you've analyzed the past policies surrounding special ed, what have you noticed are some of the policies that have changed for the better and some that have continued to harm neurodivergent students?
Okay, so I think that in a lot of ways we have included in our policy, and a lot of in Alberta specifically, Canada has, I think it was like the accessibility policy that came down, and then all the provinces were going to implement that into their own. And we see a little bit of that in Alberta, that we have these aspirations for inclusion, and that there would be, accommodations and modifications. One of the biggest policy problems that I see, and always it's easier to talk about problems than successes, but especially in Alberta, but I know it's a problem in all of Canada, is and I just want to mention, if anybody in the room feel triggered by this content, is the use of seclusion rooms and physical restraint in schools. And I think that that policy that is somewhat unregulated in a lot of ways, that we have these big global policies, but we allow for individual school boards to enact them, to define them, to use them, to monitor them. And I think that's extremely problematic, in that we can be using these in any way that the school board decides. So I would say that one's causing still harm. I know that in 2018, there was a huge media attention where there was a video released of a student who was locked in a seclusion room. And that prompted our government to what they called taking down the locks. So we have seclusion rooms. These are these concrete rooms with big doors, and they're usually, white and like hard floors. And the idea was that they would take the locks off of these doors. And so they took the locks off, and then it kind of lost momentum again. And it's my understanding that those rooms are still being built. So not only did we not decommission them, but we're still building them and providing that accessibility to them with a policy that's vague, that allows the use and not a lot of accountability for them. So in my opinion, because we have so many behaviors and this teacher learning interaction miscommunication can really result in escalation and misinterpretation of behaviors with the accessibility of processes that, you know, can only be sort of housed in the Foucauldian manner of like discipline and institutional systems where we can control other people's bodies. So I think that's really where a lot of the harm that I feel most stressed about in the policies. A long answer, I guess, I hope that answered the question.
And Dr. Douglas, do you have any thoughts, even though the question was for Jennie? I think you might be able to speak to it as well.
Oh, I wasn't formulating thoughts because let me just look back. I think Jennie did a really good job, and I think
No
we
problem.
can leave it there.
So the next question comes from Margaret Kress. She says, Marcy, for the presentations, could you comment on the overriding and hegemonic nature of spec ed policy, segregationalist and ableist, and the diluting of inclusion in a real sense within schools and larger community, and the role of educators in dismantling this notion? Has anything really changed? Oh, and a follow-up, maybe that'll be a separate one. Yeah. Whoever wants to.
Yeah, like I ask myself that all the time when I'm in interviews and hearing the same stories as, 20 years ago. But I hang on to radical hope, that the role of educators in dismantling. So in that, I'm finding many critical leaders within the system who want to make change. And so that's sort of the way that I'm working. I find the critical leaders, and like there are people who want to make change, and I think change is happening in an uneven way because, education is provincial, and then each school division takes, the policies provincially, and then you sort of, it's also very local. And I really place it again, like bringing it back to community. So working alongside Indigenous organizations, working alongside autistic community, to keep it sort of grounded so we're not losing the vision. Like education was built as a dual system, right? And it was built as a segregated on purpose by race and ability, like so-called ability lines, what's assumed to be normative sort of ability. And so it's unevenly kind of unifying. Like some school divisions are trying to bring the systems together, and we just have to hang on and have vision through that process. I do have hope, but it's hard some days. When you hear the same, like we're just publishing a paper on what we called school violence instead of bullying, because it was just, like Jennie said, so infused in everything, like teachers and peers. So like what gets called elopement in schools is actually autistic students escaping unsafe environments and trying to find safety, that kind of thing. And like that's recent, so it is hard to hang on to hope. But then there's other, like there's a whole special services administrators organization who's brought me back like 3 or 4 times to talk to all the leaders in Manitoba about shifting. And then that goes to different levels, where policy and practice is being shifted to. It's uneven, so it's discouraging at times, but also encouraging. So
Any thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like Patricia said, I think the schools are always looking to improve, but in a way, the schools aren't failing. The system was designed that way. We need a new system. We're not trying to fix something. It was built. It's actually very successful in how it was built, and it's enacting that. So until we envision a system that is different than trying to fit it into what we already believe should be the ideal, it's really hard to enact change. On the other side of that, I will acknowledge that there are teachers right now who are becoming so empathetic and so accommodating and learning and growing and evolving, and it's been really great. But the problem I'm seeing is that even though we're learning and we're adapting, the trade-off has been that learning piece. So now we're able to house students better, we're able to accommodate their needs, but the trade-off has been that we're not actually focused on the job, which is that students should be learning. That's our job, not to just house them and accommodate them. It's to develop them and grow them. So I really feel like we're making movements, but in a lot of ways, we're still not looking at it the right way. We need to be looking at it as a different system, not modifying the system that we already have.
No, that's thank you so much. And I in like another part of my life, I work at collating a survey of education resources in Ontario, and everyone's freaking out about the staff shortages and talking about how in special education in particular, when you have a shortage of staff, the only thing you can focus on is managing behaviors, and no longer we can't do anything about education at that point because we're so short for everyone. So yeah, I think that's particularly relevant right now when we have shortages of staff across the country. And I have one more question here from the same participant. Also, you speak of disability justice. How much knowledge do teachers and pre-service teachers actually have about disability and justice in Canada? Do they have a history of special ed? Um, Beginning, of course, with preschools and elementary schools, seclusion rooms and segregated classrooms are highly problematic and exist in many places in Canada. And I appreciate the story work being done. So about pre-service teachers, what kind of knowledge they have. I don't know, Jennie, you said you teach pre-service teachers. Is that something that you know kind of like how that training would go down?
Yeah, I do a little bit. And actually, my supervisor, Dr. Morrison, does a lot of work with pre-service teachers, and I've been working with her on some of these projects and inclusion, of course. And we know that if students, if they take their pre-service training programs in a program that is focused on educational inclusion, we know that they go into the schools and they're more inclusive in their ideologies. And that I think it was sort of around 2000 to 2010 when that was a very popular research model. And there's a lot of literature that came out about that. But what I'm finding with some of my students is that they're kind of stuck in this one model. A united system is their idea of inclusion. And when I start talking about whether or not that system is good for all learners, they really feel like they're challenging what their belief systems. But in the same breath, they're challenging their belief systems. They're very open to be doing that. So I think that there is work to be done in the pre-service training because it really molds students into how they're going to apply that into their practice. So I would say, I don't know, it depends on the generation that they went to school, and it depends on where they went to school and the instructors that they had. And so we're seeing sort of this mix mash of perspectives and ideologies being enacted in the same schools in just different classrooms.
Yeah, I totally agree. When I was at Brandon, I worked with pre-service teachers and as well as masters of ed who were teaching full time. And so we did like a disability justice for teachers conference in one of our courses. So like there's, again, like Jennie's saying, it's uneven. I think it depends on the faculty and who's bringing what to which programs. So, you know, I think it also expands beyond pre-service teachers to all of the other professionals who surround kids in schools. So social workers, critical rehab, doctors, other clinicians, like bringing sort of disability justice to those arenas as well. So like there's people like Alan Sentinelli Martino who works in the Faculty of Medicine at University of Calgary, who's doing disability justice and other amazing work. There's, all sorts of folks doing this work in many different faculties. And I hope to do something like that at Queen's, just to give you a little heads up there, Alana. But you know, and then there's like, we're doing an international symposium this summer called Desiring Autism and Neurodivergence, that where disability justice is very, you know, trying to do outreach about it. So trying to kind of network and get this shift in paradigm and system out to as many people as possible, I think is the way to go. And meeting people like Jennie. So you're all invited to come, and Jennie, you too, you know, like, yeah, I think that's sort of where it's at. But I think the short answer is that it's uneven again.
Well, thank you so much for those answers. And also, if you had any oh, we have one more. Wait a second. Sorry. Thank you for the excellent presentation. I would like to ask about suggestions for caregivers, parents as consultant in the student's life. How can we be included as advocates, as supports and partners? I'd be interested in learning both of your perspectives on the role of caregivers in this process of supporting disability justice. And that'll probably be our last question for the day, so I'll pass it over to you.
So I think family holds, family and kin. So like extending beyond parents to grandparents and community hold so much knowledge and need to be sort of on the journey with students together. I think that often families, educators, and disabled folks are set up in these antagonistic relationships by the very policies that are supposed to be, you know, doing parent engagement, right? So again, educating and getting savvy around how to navigate those tensions so that we can work with family in partnership. I do a lot on care, and really feel that we need to affirm care from community and kin and family.
Final thought, Jennie?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I have seen a lot of cases where the communication between the schools and the families is in tension. And I think that there's a lot of ground to be gained when we work from a position of understanding and empathy. And really, for a lot of parents, it helps to really be informed and to build allies and to use those allies to sort of really be courageous, to challenge schools, to use that moral courage to acknowledge and understand and to grow from a very appreciative stance. So it really is a lot of work on one side to get the work on the other side to bridge together. But I think it really comes to that understanding that we have a shared purpose of trying to grow and develop, you know, a person, somebody who's very important and has family and has relationships, and just to really bring that human perspective of what we're trying to do, to step outside a little bit of the rules and the policies and the have-tos. So I would say, yeah, I like to use the word moral courage to sort of just say, hey, listen, you know what, we're here together. We want success. We're coming with the best of intentions. And this is the most important little person in my world. And I'm gifting them to you every day. And we need to remember that that's what our role is to grow and develop.
Oh, that's such a great point to leave on. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the presentations and the really amazing glimpse into worlds. Yeah, just one more like huge shout out for both Jennie and Patty. Thank you so much for joining. And we'll see you next year at our next webinar series. Thank you so much.